want to welcome everyone to this webinar on the recent study on the national state of disciple making in the United States. I'm so pleased to have each and every one of you with us. I'm Bobby Harrington, and I'm the point leader of discipleship.org. And discipleship.org champions Jesus-style disciple making, and we want to fan into flames the disciple making of networks and organizations all around the United States and beyond. We have at least 30 regular partners, including the Navigator Church Division, and we have Justin Gravitt, Laura Gregg, and Dane Allphin, who are about to join us. But I just want to say a word about our vision. Our vision is we long for the day when Jesus-style disciple making is the norm for families, communities, churches, and ministries. So how's that? We look forward to that day. And according to this report that we're about to talk about, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So I just want to welcome everyone. So glad to have you with us. And I'd like to ask Justin Gravitt, if you would jump on. Justin's going to co-host with me today. So if you would introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your team, introduce your team, and then we'll talk about the study.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Bobby. We're excited to be here. I'm Justin Gravitt. I'm with Navigators Church Ministries and have been with the Navigators for about 20 years. And I've been self-isolating for about 10 or 15 as an introvert. So a little bit used to this. My team today joining us is Dane Allphin. He's the National Director for Navigators Church Ministries for us. And he has a breadth of experience. He was a pastor for a while. He was on Young Life staff for a while. And now we have the privilege of having him
so Dane,
on our team leading us. Go ahead, Dane.
Up so we can see your face, Dane.
Yes. Yeah, my name's Dane Allphin, and have last 9 years served with the Navigators, and I'm now the lead. And we partner with church leaders and pastors, helping them to make disciples in everyday places where they work, live, and play. And primarily, we do that through our life and leadership coaching and through our GIDC that you'll perhaps hear a little bit about today. And that's growing intentional disciple-making cultures. And it's a 3-year process where we walk with a pastor and help them to figure out how to build a core team and then take that to the culture, to the congregation, and ultimately to their neighborhoods and to their communities.
Oh, that's great. I think, Justin, you also have another guest you'd like to introduce to us.
Yes, Laura Gregg, who's on staff at a church down near Cincinnati. And I've been working with that church for about 3 years now through our process of growing intentional disciple-making cultures. And so I wanted to have her join because she is, in the midst of, this movement from a traditional church culture to a disciple-making culture. And just her journey is fascinating just in how she's experienced it personally, but also what she's doing at the church. So Laura, why don't you take it from there?
Thanks, Justin. And so, as Justin introduced me, I do not have a ministry background. I spent about 10 years teaching at a local high school, and I felt a nudge to take this job opening at our church. And so I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into, but I said yes. And right at the same time I took that job, Justin and I got connected. And so, as he kind of said, my own journey from more of a churchgoer into a disciple maker in everyday life has sort of mirrored what has been going on in our church as well. And even my job title has changed over those years. And now I'm executive director of our disciple making ministries.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're so glad to have all of you with us. The focus of our conversation is going to be this national study that discipleship.org and Exponential and all of our partners are releasing. So we're glad to do this webinar with you. And what I'd like to do as we begin is I want you all to know that during this 1 hour time when we're together, you can ask questions. So if you're not sure how to ask questions, you have 3 options. And if you'll put your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom page there, unless you're online, and we have some folks who are watching the Facebook Live, we'll try to get your questions to us. There's a Q&A box, and you can pop that Q&A box and ask questions, or you can, secondly, you can go to the chat room, and we have some folks who will try to help with the questions there in the chat room. Typically, the chat room is more for conversations while the webinar is going on. And then thirdly, if you'd like, you can raise your hand in the participant box. You can actually, if you'll notice, there's a way for you to raise your hand, and we can then select you and you can ask your question live. So we're going to try to do that third element to enhance the conversation, so that folks, if they have a strong question you'd like to ask, you can be invited in. So Justin, let me ask you this. I'm about to show the summary results of the report on the screen, but I wanted to ask as you begin, if you have anything you'd like to say about the report first.
Sure. Yeah, overall, we were very excited that discipleship.org did this, because it is hard to get good data on what's actually happening out there in churches beyond just our personal circle of experience, right? One of the biggest things I think that stood out to us as a team is just that we have a lot of work to do, to be honest, because, with how few churches are even in level 4, let alone not having any in level 5, it shows us that we all have a lot to learn. And as navigators who have kind of been at this for over 80 years as an organization, even though this was focused on the church, the reality is, we have people that we have worked with in the different spheres of our ministry, whether it's collegiate or military, that, are in the churches as everyday church people, or as leaders, or as pastors. And, I think that was just a humbling thing for us to see, again, that we have a long way to go, and a lot of us have a lot that we can still be learning in discipling.
Well, that's good. That's really good. Well, I noticed that both the chat box and the Q&A box, there's some questions coming up there. So we want to try to get to those. Justin, I know that you all shared the link to the study, and I think you may have an access to that. If you can be getting that, and I'm going to get the report up on the screen by way of summary so that everybody can see that. Can everybody see that? So let me just review the summary. We've got some key points. I'm just going to hit the highlights. And Dane and Laura, if you guys want to jump in on any of these, I want to pause after we've done it so that you can also jump in. First off, fewer than 5% of churches in the US have a reproducing disciple-making culture. So we can come back to that. Justin hit at it. It's what we call level 4 churches or level 5 churches, which are the kinds of churches we definitely promote. So a level 4 church, which would represent less than 5% of the churches in the United States, they actually have a culture where disciples personally, I'll describe it in personal terms versus programmatic terms, where disciples personally make disciples of others. Secondly, we could not find level 5 churches that reflect viral disciple-making movements. One of the men that we feature at discipleship.org is Shadonke Johnson, who leads one of the disciple-making movements around the world. According to Mission Frontiers, there's about 1,000 disciple-making movements around the world. We couldn't find a viral, revival-like disciple-making movement in the United States. Number 3, there is a lack of commonly understood definitions. Let me state it this way. Disciple-making and discipleship can mean anything and everything. And when it means anything and everything, unfortunately, it means practically nothing. Because if everything is discipleship and everything is disciple-making, then very little is discipleship and disciple-making in terms of meaningful categories. And then number 4, pastors are overestimating their disciple-making impact. So we'll come to the recommendations, but let me just pause there and give a chance for Dane and Laura and Justin to jump in.
So a quick question I'm seeing, Bobby. Do we know the scope of this survey? I know I saw that, but I'm looking around for it. How many churches were involved? You know, that
Yeah,
sort of
so
idea.
there was 1,000 churches involved. There was a professional research firm, Gray Matter, that does work for a lot of organizations. Gray Matter did the work and made sure it was done according to scientific standards. And it's within 3% accuracy of all the churches in the United States. How's that for an answer?
It's right on it. The other thing I'm seeing is if we could define these levels a little bit. So I think some people are unfamiliar with the levels. So level 1 through 5.
Okay, I'll just do a quick overview of the levels, and then the report goes into it a little more detail. Level 1, let me try to get in front of myself here. Actually, I think I can put a background so that when I raise my hand, you can see. Here, I'll just pick a fancy background to put behind me. Is that a fancy enough background for everybody? Level 1 is a church that's actually declining. It's got a culture where people are turning away from Jesus and no longer being disciples. Level 2 church is a church where it's plateaued. The church is neither adding disciples, subtracting disciples, and it's just in a plateau mode. Level 3 church is a church that's using programs to add disciples. Typically, we describe it in these 3 ways. It's growing by the preacher, by the praise and worship, and by the programs, rather than Jesus-style disciple making. Level 4 is where disciples are making, like individual disciples are making disciples, and it's reproducing, which is good and healthy. Level 5 is where it's multiplication. It's a movement that you'd have to work to stop, where there's disciple making at least 4 generations in multiple streams of a church, and it regularly results in church plants every year. So again, it's a really exciting thing, but not happening so much in North America. So I hope that summary helps.
Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of the people that are on today haven't yet seen the full report. And so we'll be able to make that available to them, correct, Bobby? Maybe towards the end of the webinar.
Sure,
then,
if we can just get a link, we can go ahead and put it up in the chat right away.
I put a link in the chat to the one that you guys, so if they put in their info,
there you go.
But I don't know how quick that's going to get back to them because it gets emailed back.
Well, they can just click on it and download it straight away.
You can just click and download. So it's in the chat box here on Zoom. And then we're going to walk through some of the big findings that the survey or the study showed, right? Yeah. Dane, do you want to start us out on that, or Laura, as far as what were some of the big things that you guys noticed or that stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that there's only 5% of the churches that are, making disciples, and that level 4. And I think there's a lot of, at least in my experience, there's a lot of reasons why that happens. One, personal disciple making is hard enough. I think we all realize, oh my gosh, this is hard to get someone to move ahead. And it just becomes so much more complicated when it's organizational discipleship, because you have history, values that kind of come in, and you have large groups that just are reluctant to be a part of it. So, but I think one of the things too is that for a lot of pastors, they've not been discipled. And so I see that that's also a problem, because they're unfamiliar with, like, well, how do I do this? How do I walk alongside somebody? How do I help them, hold them accountable, help get to know them, help them to love and live the scriptures? I think all those things, it's just foreign. So I think that's a big reason why we are kind of really only at 5% in terms of kind of personal disciple making situations. And that's one of the things that stood out to me.
Good.
Bobby, how about you as the leader of discipleship.org? From your seat, what were some of the things that the study maybe confirmed or maybe that were surprising for you?
The thing that, I'll just be transparent with you guys. I've worked enough in the disciple making space with churches that I wasn't surprised that the number was just under 5%. In fact, in some ways, it was a better number than I thought it was going to be, because most people in North America, and this goes back to how churches in North America were founded, coming out of the Protestant Reformation and the American frontier. I already knew that few churches were actually committed to Jesus' method of disciple making. So I was surprised that there was like about 5%. So that was good. The thing that discouraged me is a combination of discipleship and disciple making means anything and everything. And then pastors were claiming it. So pastors literally were saying everything they did was really disciple making. And, in one avenue, I can argue that everything a church does contributes to disciple making, but to say that everything a church does is disciple making shows the real confusion and fog. As like they used to say with the Apollo movies, Houston, we have a problem. So that was the biggest thing that stood out to me.
Yeah. I think for me, a couple of the things on the came out really in the recommendations was first that, right, the lack of clear definitions. But the other one was this idea that we don't have clarity around the mission, right? And so even what you said speaks to that, right? So if we're saying anything and everything is this thing of disciple making, then it presents a problem because we're talking about different things and then we're assessing those different things and putting the same label on it. And down in Nashville at the last forum, I led a workshop on mission clarity. And one of the things that I did, which was kind of a fun thing, was I gave a card, like a playing card, to every person as they came in the door. And I said, hang on to this, you're going to need it. And then as the workshop began, I said, all right, you guys have 2 minutes to sort yourselves. And we're going to have a winner and be competitive, go. And so, they're scurrying around. I didn't give them any other information. And so finally they sort themselves kind of as I thought they would, right, into suits. And so you had a group of hearts, a group of spades, a group of clubs. And then I picked a winner. And we talked about, what this was is essentially if we're not clear on the mission or the rules of the game, then we fall back and play games that we've played before. And I think that's what happens in churches a lot is we start putting labels of disciple making onto things, but we don't really know what the game is or how somebody wins. And in the workshop, I said, all right, that guy's the winner. And what happens normally is we look around at, well, who's got the most, right? Who's got the most people? Who's got the most this? And in our minds and hearts somewhere, we say, well, they're winning. I got to figure out what they did and be like them.
Yeah.
And, it's just, we're playing different games.
Yep. I think that's right. Now, Laura, I want to draw you in here. I know Justin's been working with you, and Justin, I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time with Justin over the last few years, and I think he's got a really good understanding of this. Talk to us about the journey that you've been on with Justin.
I always jokingly say Justin ruined my life. I had a nice, comfy life, and I thought everything seemed to be working out, and he kind of flipped that upside down for us. And so, I first met Justin, I was new hire, and our pastor said he'd been working with Justin. I'm getting a group together of disciple making, and I thought it's very similar to this say. I thought I knew what that meant. I'd been in church my whole life. I thought I got it. And being a performance-driven person, I said, okay, sign me up. I'll be there. And our very first meeting, it kind of dawned on me that I had been discipled on how to go to church and how to participate in church.
Oh, that's a great way to say it.
But I had not been discipled as how to follow Jesus, and what it meant to go and be on mission for him. And so we spent about 2 years of just kind of our small leadership, just our pastor, my husband, a few others in this team, just figuring out what it meant to be a disciple, what it meant to be a disciple maker. I'm really starting from the ground up. And then at the same time, being on staff, we started to make some changes within the church that would create an environment where disciple making could happen as a culture. And so it has been a long road. I would say we're in the middle of it. We are still figuring it out. I think the study, as you were talking about, what sort of stands out, those levels tend to be a start line or the finish line that we notice.
Yeah.
But we tend to miss, I've run in races before. The middle of the race is awful. The middle of the race, you're thinking, can I keep going? Am I going to get sick on the side of the road? It's hard. And we kind of miss out on some of that.
No, that's good. One of the things that Laura jumped in on is sort of a different understanding. So one of the questions we have in the Q&A box is, it's by Douglas, is there a common definition of Jesus-style disciple making? So let me give you 2 definitions. The second one will be Jesus-style disciple making. But before I give you the definitions, let me give you just a little bit of background. When we were forming discipleship.org, we brought together the leaders that we could of the major disciple-making organizations in the country, and we worked on things like definitions. So the Navigators were involved, Robbie Gallaty with Replicate, Bill Hull with the Bonhoeffer Project. Actually, it was before the creation of the Bonhoeffer Project, Jim Putman, Dan Spader, and everybody agreed to use certain definitions in our gathering times together with discipleship.org, even if they had slightly different definitions. So you can't open the Bible and say, okay, here's one biblical definition of what a disciple is or what disciple making is. But we had a consensus around definitions, and these are all listed on discipleship.org. You'll go to discipleship.org and the About tab. It gives you a list of all the definitions. The definitions are also, if you download the study, they're in the study as well. But let me just tell you how we're defining a disciple. A disciple, and this is built around Matthew 4:19. A disciple is somebody who is following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and committed to the mission of Jesus. So it involves, disciple making involves from the decision to follow Jesus, to the midlife where Jesus is changing us, to the fact that a true disciple is also going to be joining the mission of Jesus in reaching lost people and making disciples. So then what is a disciple maker? What's a definition of Jesus-style disciple making? The broad picture on that, by the way, is we want to do what Jesus did with his disciples, because we believe that actually Jesus gives us, in the words of Robert Coleman, the best possible method of making disciples. And so, excuse me, disciple making is entering into relationships to help people follow Jesus, be changed by Jesus, and join or be committed to the mission of Jesus. So I hope that that helps. Justin, let me draw you back in, see if you have any comments as we're moving along.
Yeah, I think, again, with the terminology, it's important, right? And it's important not just as we come together with discipleship.org, but as churches begin to think about, how do I develop a culture of disciple making? Well, part of that culture is defining the terms in a way that is common within your culture, because that is one of the things that shape culture, is how we use language, how we define things. And so really, as we work with churches and helping them build cultures, that's one of the things that we do, is help them develop their own definitions. And we obviously expose them to the definitions that we're most familiar with and tied to, but each culture's got to figure out their own in the sense of whether they're going to own the ones that discipleship.org has put forth, or, if they feel like, oh, we need to have a subtle change here and there. But terminology, I think, is connected to that mission problem. Because I've been in lots of conversations, and I know you have, Bobby, and everybody on this call has, where we're trying to describe what we're doing and what we're talking about. And people are kind of nodding along, but then their actions indicate they really aren't following what we're saying, because we're kind of communicating into this cloud where we think we're saying the same words and with the same definitions, but we're not.
No, I think you're totally right with what you're saying, Justin. I'll tell you what, we're getting a lot of questions now in the Q&A box, which is good. I want to invite people, if you want to go live, excuse me, if you will raise your hand in the participant box. So again, at the bottom of the Zoom call, you can raise your hand, and we'll try to field some questions. I see William. Let me see if I can bring you to the forefront here, where you can ask your question. See, he's got his hand raised, but it looks like we can only get him to type in his question. So William, if you'll go ahead and do that. Looks like we can't bring you verbally or visually into the conversation, but please type out your question. While he's doing that, let me go back to one of the questions that Les posted on the Q&A box, and that is, are pastors and leaders overestimating because they don't have a clear and consistent definition, or do they not have any experience themselves? Dane, can I get you to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think what we see over and over again is that most of the people that we talk to have not had the experience. And so they've not had someone walk in their life. I've seen this with millennials, which is surprising, with pastors that are older, that you would kind of think, oh, well, they probably never got something like this. So we see it a lot in a lot of the guys that we work with, because they've not seen it happen. And if you don't see it modeled, it's hard to, so much of this is caught, and not just taught. And in that great passage in Mark chapter 3, where Jesus is with the crowd, in the very next little paragraph, he's like, and he picked those he wanted, to be with him and to preach the gospel and to cast out demons. That's in Mark chapter 3. And right there, you just see that difference there, that so many, it's easier for us to stay in the crowd as a pastor. But to go down to that next paragraph in Mark chapter 3, it's really about these relationships and getting involved with kind of the nitty gritty of people, and then sending people out. It's not just about me being the hero being sent out. And so many of those dynamics have worked against us in the church. And so, yeah, Justin or Laura, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Laura, I think that's you.
I think it's, I know we say focus on pastors, but I think it's a lot the people within the church too. Is we have pushback all the time of people saying, so you mean you're telling me we haven't made disciples, or just trying to help them understand it's like, it wasn't bad, it just might be a little incomplete. And like, I think to echo what Dane's saying, it's hard to do it unless you've actually experienced it. We can kind of try to explain it to you and people go, oh yeah, I'm doing that. But until they see it in action, it's a little bit harder to kind of grasp. Some ways it's trying to explain parenting to somebody who hasn't had kids yet, and how you love them and they drive you nuts at the same time, and you would do anything for them, and you gain so much more than you're actually giving. But that's really hard to explain to people. And I think Some of it comes down to there are certain things we have preferences for, that make us feel comfortable at church, and to begin to actually kind of question whether those programs, they're not bad, maybe they're good, but are they the best? It's a hard self-examination to look at.
Well, it's a totally different operating system for a church. Hey, I think we figured out how to get William Butt, where he can come on and ask his question. So William, good to see you. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, so I'm a lead disciple maker in my church, and I've got a discipleship group that does nothing but discipleship. We're currently 4 members strong. I don't have a problem getting people to follow Jesus. Don't have a problem getting people changed by Jesus. The problem I have is getting people committed to the mission of Jesus. And I was just wondering if you had any advice on how to get that last piece of a disciple, because I tried to do this discipleship group like the renew.org book that came out like a month ago, and I could only get 4 people committed to changing lives for Jesus.
Well, that's a good start. At least you started out. I think that you put your finger, William, on the big deal in terms of reproducing disciples. To have a culture of reproducing disciples, you have to have reproducing disciple makers, and reproducing disciple makers are only going to be motivated by joining the mission of Jesus. So Justin, I'm going to turn to you and have you jump in and take the first swing at that, and then Dane will let you take it. Thanks for your question, William.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a common struggle. I've had pastors say to me before, I have no trouble making disciples. The problem I have is getting them to make disciples. And that's like saying you don't have trouble making chairs. You just have trouble when somebody goes to sit in them. Because when we make a disciple, that means they are going to go out and make other disciples. And so there's a lot of struggle around that piece. And I found that, the curriculum is not normally the problem. The problem is how we're leveraging or using the curriculum. Are we being relational enough as we're moving through it? Are we putting forth vision before them, right? Of, okay, this is why we're together, because churches and church people are used to coming together around groups. But what they're not used to is being asked to go do something after the group is over. It's normally, all right, I'm in this group, and then I get to the next group and the next group. And what disciple making is really asking is, okay, we're going to learn something here and grow here, and then we're going to be taking it out to impact others with it. And so that's the piece that really we have to be cascading them with that message over and over again as we meet with them and invest in them.
That's good. That's really good. We're going to take a pause here for a second. I'm going to ask if Dave, who's our technical guy, all-around wonderful disciple of Jesus himself, he's going to put an ad up, if he would, because we want to let everybody know about the National Disciple Making Forum at the end of April. And so Dave, if you can put that flyer up, I assume you have that flyer. And if I'm wrong on this point, Dave, if you'll just let me know, because that was one of the things we were trying to get clarified as we were beginning. And that is, we are going to go ahead with our National Disciple Making Forum at the end of April. We will have main stage sessions and breakout groups. We're just going to do it all online. With the coronavirus hitting the way it is, we plan to replicate the same experience and to do it online. And that online experience will have 3 parts. We'll have high quality presentations. There you go. Dave's got it there. High quality main stage. It'll also have discussions like we're having with Q&A boxes and chat boxes, and then breakout groups. So I think Dave has a video, and I'm going to ask Dave to show that video at this time. Well, that was a cool spur of the moment video, Dave. Way to go on getting that out there. I do want to encourage everybody who's with us to give us a day or two to recalibrate the registration, because prices will be dropping for the online experience. I also think that we've got some more questions. So let me turn to those. And Dane, I'm going to ask you to take the one after this. This is one I'm probably uniquely positioned to answer. It's from Preston Condor. In fact, I think we're going to try to bring Preston's face up in front of us. He has a question about the metrics on the study. So Preston, if you can ask that question, that would be great.
Hey, can you see me, Bobby?
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Hey, man, I've just got a question on a few key metrics for level 4 or 5 disciple making. What do we need to be measuring to see level 4 and level 5 disciple making take place?
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's good. Good question. So these metrics, the 10 key metrics for level 4 disciple making culture and level 5 disciple making culture are in the study. Let me just say a couple of key things about them, and I'm about to sneeze.
Bless you.
Don't know that you can sneeze on webinars, but I don't know how to stop it. So a couple of the key metrics you want to look for. So the idea is at level 4, it's a culture of disciples reproducing disciples. So when of the people you consider to be part of your church community, like they would be members or however you define that, but these are the people who are part of your community called the church. When 25% of them or more are involved in discipling other people, then you're getting up to level 4. So the key metric that I look for in terms of measuring would be that one. There are some other metrics that are really important. For example, there's a culture of fasting and prayer. There's also, and these 3 words are really important, a simple, effective, and reproducible model of disciple making. So that's how I would answer that in a short fashion, Preston. We could probably do, well, I know we could do a whole webinar on those, but I would encourage you to look at them. Dane, I think I was going to turn things over to you, so I'm going to give you a chance to talk about just disciple making culture in general, what you see in churches that are making that transition.
Well, I think that the big thing that you see, and you begin to watch generations begin to form. So not only are people discipling their little group, but you begin to see others begin to do it. So there's generations, and that's one of the markers that we're looking for. We're also looking for people learning to read the scriptures themselves. And it sounds so much like a Sunday school lesson that you'd give in a 3rd grade Sunday school class. But by and large, most people don't have regular input. The Reveal survey kind of proved that kind of very pragmatically a number of years ago, and it still works out, is that most people are not engaged with the scriptures. And because of that, people kind of just use the verse of the day, and they're in the middle of brushing their teeth, and then they kind of run out the door and they don't remember it, but they're not soaking in it, basking in it. As Bill Mowry says, one of our staff guys says, we want to help folks love and live the scriptures. And that's a key piece that we're looking for. So we're trying to help churches as we're working with them all the way through. One of the things I'm always talking to the pastor about particularly is, hey, what's your fresh bread? What are you learning today in the scriptures? Because if that's not happening at the top, it's not going to happen naturally and flow out to the others. And for me, that's like one of the things I'm really looking for and I'm listening to. Is there a sense of that the scriptures are kind of having their way? One of my friends, a guy named Jerry Ray's in a real small church, 40 people. And it was so fun to watch how the scriptures kind of became viral in their church. And this is a Lutheran church. And one of the things that they started doing, they were so excited that before the service started, they would read from that book, the story that it's not the book, but it's the Bible, and it's kind of put in narrative form. They would read a section of that and discuss it before the service. Now, this is not like a Bible church. This is a Lutheran church. And so that was one of the ways that I just knew that this was becoming much more part of the culture, and what the preeminence and the use and engagement with the scriptures. So Laura or Justin, what would be some things that you guys would say?
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I think we can think about metrics, but we also think about markers, and kind of the difference is markers is more of, what lifestyle habits or patterns are being created for the people in the culture. And of course, we can count those people, but like Dane's saying, how many times are people in the scriptures? So there's a study that came out, in the past couple of months, that if you read the scriptures 4 times or more, it shows a very pronounced impact on your life. But that was a significant number of 4, right? So if you can get at least 4, that's a big difference in the way that seems to soak in and begins to change people's lives. So we think about that. Other things that we help churches think about is, a lot of churches are focused on, all right, counting baptisms. Great thing to count. We need to count that. But the other thing that we should be counting is, well, what happens a year after the baptism? How many of those people are being discipled? Maybe 3 years out, how many of the people that have been baptized are now leading a small group or are discipling somebody else? Because Jesus had 3 years with his guys. So 3 years after somebody comes into a disciple-making culture, a church culture, what happens, right? So these are some of the metrics that we begin to help churches think through to begin to build that culture of shared vision, practices, story, etc. But the metrics really, we're measuring what matters most to us. And if we're proclaiming that we're most concerned about making disciples who make disciples, then our metrics should reflect that at some level.
That's good. Laura, I'm going to let you jump in, and then afterwards, Justin, I'd like you to come back to this question about curriculum and all that is in the Q&A box. Laura?
Yeah, it's just, I think, to tease out a little point that Justin just talked about was markers, and to think about things in more of the terms of movement. I say a lot of times churches have, in the attractional model, and we ourselves are guilty sometimes, we offer a cheesecake factory style menu. We offer lots of things and pick and choose what you like. And there's just so much, and there's not a whole lot of movement. And so one of the things that we've been trying to talk through and work towards as we kind of shift our culture is more of a Chipotle style environment, where we help people kind of start to see movement in markers. There's still room for individualism. There's still room for preferences. We're all kind of working towards a common product, a common disciple making. Disciple makers read those common definitions, and we can see what they look like.
That's good. Justin, just so everybody knows, you'd mark this in the Q&A box. The question is, with so many resources and curriculum available to churches, why are we not seeing a disciple-making culture as a result of them using these materials?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it comes back to one of the things that the study showed is that we're not clear on the mission, right? And so if you think about different ways that churches get engaged in this disciple-making conversation, it's starting to become buzzwordish, right? And topic-wise in the churches. And I think sometimes churches come in just because they're trying to survive, right? So they're in survival mode. Well, we've tried everything. We're kind of going down numbers-wise. Let's try this. But really what's behind their motivation there is just to get people in. And, the attractional church model, which is less and less effective today, they say, well, maybe it's just disciple making. Maybe we need to get that. And so we're doing the same thing, but it's a distinction without a difference, because even though their core mission hasn't really changed, they're engaging disciple making language and materials around that core, which is, missional, attractional. Another one would be spiritual leaders, that they're just trying to grow spiritual leaders. Another one might be just missional. We're trying to get our church out, which is obviously a part of disciple making, what we should be doing, but they often miss kind of generational aspect of it. And so what they're doing is they're engaging programs in the same way they've always engaged programs, but they're just doing disciple making programs now. So I think that's, to me, probably the biggest reason why, even though there's a lot of great curriculum, programs, materials around disciple making, if we don't have clarity on what we're trying to do with them, if the leaders don't have clarity, then we're not going to get the results we're looking for.
Well, and Justin, I would add too, it's, one of the definitions that you guys have supplied in disciple making, it's people intentionally entering into relationships. And it's not a programmatic solution to it. When you cut out the relationship, you cut out the potential to really go deep, I think. And I think because you're entering in these relationships, you will have much more conversation on the deeper issues, on the painful issues that need to be worked through. And you don't get those solved necessarily in a programmatic setting. It's easier to check off the boxes, a little more comfortable, but in the safety of 2 or 3, you can begin to kind of unpack some of these things. You're going, I don't know how to do this. I'm just not good. And I think that's one of the benefits of the way you guys have defined it. And we would agree too, that relationship piece of it, the vision. But if you don't make it relational, it can just stay in a sterile environment and not really kind of cause real life change and transformation.
That's good. Hey, I want to, we've just got a few minutes left. So I'd like to transition to the recommendations that came out of the study, just in terms of, okay, if this is what we're saying is the difficulty, what are some solutions? So let me just go through these real quick, and then you guys can jump in. First off, we want to champion clear definitions and commonly understood language. I feel like we've talked about that. We've commended the definitions that discipleship.org is using. Secondly, and I would say when it comes to culture, this may be the most important thing. Senior pastors must embrace disciple making as the core mission of the local church. I would put senior pastors must personally embrace. Like, here's the key criteria. Senior pastors must set the example for the whole church that they're making disciples who make disciples. Then that leads to number 3, develop new measures of success. If we keep going with he who gets the most in the audience is considered the faithful one, then that sets up a lot of problems. If, on the other hand, are we making disciples who make disciples for generations in multiple streams throughout the church that lead to disciples who make disciples that plant churches that make disciples? That's a different scorecard. And then number 4, to champion effective strategies and models. So let me just turn it back to you. Justin, I'm going to turn to you first, and then Laura and Dane.
Yeah. We were encouraged at one level when we saw these, because even though, as I opened with how much we all need to be figuring out and learning and becoming, more curious about how we can do even better than what we're doing. But those 4 things are things that we are focused on as we walk with churches. And, one of the things with Navigator Church Ministries, we have about 125 practitioners like myself walking with pastors and churches. And so we're encouraged at that level that this is consistent with what we've been seeing as we engage with pastors in the field. But it also, presents a high bar for us to say, all right, we got to continue to look at that over and over again and beat those drums of mission and definitions and finding practical ways to help not only the pastors, but really the everyday disciple makers who are in the churches, so that they're out and the pastors are out engaging with the lost and helping them come to know him. Laura, I know that when you and I were talking, you kind of mentioned a little bit of reaction that you had in terms of what the study was showing and what your experience currently is in the church. And would you share a little bit of that?
Yeah. I totally echo what you're saying. And it is, to me, it's not, the study wasn't super surprising, but it was a little reassuring that we're on that path. When I first read the study, and I read through the levels, I think part of my question was like, how is this studying reflecting the churches who were in the middle of it? And, because I felt like ourselves were a few years into this and we're making strides, but in some ways we don't fit nice and neat in any category. I'd almost describe us as sort of like the awkward middle school age, that some parts of us are more developed than others, and it's awkward, it's hard, and you're trying to grow a little bit faster than you want to and try to make that cultural shift. And there's still part of you that's mourning where you've been. And so I would just, for all the churches that are out there, they're saying, we're trying to get there. I know it's a hard journey, but keep with it. And I think that's, at the end of the day, the recommendations, it's kind of like, okay, we're on the right path, even though it can be a hard place. And sometimes Justin has to talk me off ledges.
That's good.
One of the things that we learned.
Oh, go ahead, Dane.
One of the things that we learned a number of years ago is that my predecessor, a guy named Dave Johnson, all over Northeast Ohio, people know him, and he did all these discipleship groups that are around, and I'd bump into people say, oh my gosh, the 2-7 series changed my life. And it's a piece of curriculum. It's very helpful. A lot of churches are using it, today. And, but one of the shifts that we had is that we went from going from just starting groups to beginning to focus on the senior pastor, because if the senior pastor began to make some gains in terms of their understanding of discipleship, disciple making, in the ways that we would talk about it, we would find that you had a much greater success of multiplying your life exponentially, if you will, through the whole church. I learned this when I was on staff and at the chapel. And I remember one guy telling me one time, he said, if Newt, who was the senior pastor, if Newt Larson doesn't like it, it ain't going to happen here. And I thought, oh, come on. Then you're not a good leader. Well, about 3 years later, I was like, if Newt doesn't like it, it's not going to happen. And there is a natural, the senior pastor is that gatekeeper for so many things, what happens in the church. And if you can get a senior pastor's heart, he's going to ensure that lots of other folks buy into this. He's going to make sure that everything that's going is going to work that way. So it's so worth it for us to work with a pastor, because we have the opportunity to affect hundreds and thousands very quickly right off the bat if one pastor kind of begins to rethink their paradigm for discipleship.
Boy, that's really good. We just have a couple minutes left, and Justin, if I'm on this webinar and I'm saying, I really like what they're saying at Navigator Church Ministries, how can somebody follow up with you to find out more about what you guys do and how you can help them?
Yeah, we would love to continue the conversation and continue to engage people. There's 2 ways they can do that. The first way is just to email us directly. So that email is ncm@navigators.org. ncm@navigators.org. Dane, maybe you can put in the chat box for us.
I'll do that right now.
And then the other way is through our website, which is navigatorschurchministries.org. Navigatorschurchministries.org. And if you want to email us, we would love to send you a booklet that kind of shows the process that we take a church through. It's called Crockpot Disciple Making, How I Left My Instapot Behind. And really what it is, what does this process look like as it moves through a church? And, we'd love to send that to you for free. We'd love to engage with you over it, and just continue to support and help disciple making in churches throughout the country.
Well, Justin, thank you. Dane, thank you for joining us, and Laura. And hopefully this has been a profitable time for all those who've joined with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next time for our ongoing conversations on how we can champion Jesus-style disciple making.